Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, the UN is hosting this year's Climate Summit on December 12th, virtually. At the same time, it marks the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Paris Agreement on climate change. What's been achieved so far? Some cities in China reported new domestically transmitted COVID cases this week. With technology vital for tracking and tracing, how can both health and privacy be protected? And this week's Newsmaker, now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qinduo. 5 years ago in Paris, the world came and joined together to sign a legally binding treaty on climate change. The Paris Agreement is a pledge to combat global warming and achieve a climate-neutral world by mid-century. But what has been done and how far are we from meeting its goals? And what's special about this year's meeting, which opens today and is co-hosted by the UK, the United Nations and France? To talk more about the global efforts on climate change, we are joined via satellite by Wang Dan, Chief Economist at Hang Seng Bank China, and via Skype by Wu Changhua, Executive Director of the Professional Association for China's Environment in Washington, D.C. So welcome to the show, Changhua and Wang Dan. Here, Changhua, we'll start with you. This year's conference, is there anything special about that? Because it's a virtual meeting, because it's being done, amid the ongoing crisis for COVID-19.
Thanks, Qinduo. Yes, the Climate Ambition Summit is a very, very special event. It's intended to create a global platform of leadership. So there's no room for general statements, which we often see at UN conferences over the years, over the decades. This time, countries' leaders are given the platform to pledge their carbon neutrality goals and specific action plans to deliver that. And of course, this is going to happen around the Paris Agreement framework, particularly around the three major pillars around climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and climate finance. As we all know, Paris Agreement entered into effect about 4 years ago. Of course, 1 year after the Paris Agreement was adopted in Paris, end of 2015. If you look at all the pledges so far in the basket, we know very well, very clearly, that we're not anywhere near the below 2 degrees warming goal, or even, of course, even further, actually, from the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming goal. What we have today on the table in the basket is about 3.2 degrees Celsius warming, sort of pathway. Very important, this summit is expected to deliver more momentum, and hopefully more pledges will be put together to get us closer to the Paris Agreement goal.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wang Dan, obviously, it's reduction of emission is not only about the climate change policy, adopted by individual nations. It's also about economy. Sometimes the country will worry that if I adopt an aggressive policy, somehow that will affect my economic growth. That's why probably it's called Climate Ambition Summit. Ambition, kind of unique, in talk about the climate change, and probably that's why Australian Prime Minister was delisted actually from the list of speakers at the meeting. Not ambitious enough?
Right. I think this is a very hard balance for every country to strike. Of course, we know that the green economy is the future. We want to rewire the global economy towards the greener path. But when it comes to revive the local economy, most countries cannot afford, actually, to change drastically from its past path. So in the case of China, of India, domestic recession or potential recession is the #1 priority. So to revive the economy, you have to rely on some of the traditional ways. And then on top of that, for many developed economies, there's the electoral cycle. So we know that President Trump didn't care about climate change at all. So there was very little moves taken under his watch. And now Biden is back into the picture, so maybe the U.S. will do more. But still, every 4 years, every 8 years, we'll see an electoral cycle. Then the leadership made the commitment in the previous term may not count anymore. So that will create this roller coaster ride in the national mood for climate change. I think that's a bigger challenge.
Well, Changhua, we know like the U.S. is one of the biggest polluters, obviously, and also at the same time largest economy. If the U.S. failed to promise or to meet their pledge for carbon emissions over there, the cut over there, and other countries may follow suit or may learn the wrong lesson, as in probably Australia's case over there. Picking up on what you have said about basically we are behind the goals. So what are the factors leading to sort of like a failure to meet the goal?
Well, I think Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Agreement has proven to be a very disruptive, very destructive factor. It definitely threatens the credibility, integrity of the international process, meaning the Paris Agreement. But on the other side, I think if you take a look at the last 5 years, I would call something called a glass half full. If you look at the half full part, basically, the U.S. withdrawal didn't really derail the whole process. EU, China, and many others continue to lead and continue to carry on the baton, right? And so if you look at the investment in renewable energy, reduction regulations, incentives put together, and more excitingly, actually, it's really invest in new technology, new infrastructure. So from that perspective, I think the Paris Agreement has proven to be designed as it is, to be very resilient, very inclusive, and also at scale. I think the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement somehow given a case actually made that the Paris Agreement will not disappear because of the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. By saying that, I have to say, U.S. definitely has a big, big role to play for the efficacy of the international process, meaning it's the largest economy, and it's the second largest emitters in the world, and also U.S. has the technology capability and is rich, the richest in the world, so that on one side it has to make sure it mitigates its own emissions carbon footprint, and the other side is obligated to provide financial support to other developing countries. In the package, we know there is a number. This is $100 billion every year by now. It should be put together by developed countries to support the developing countries. I think overall the process carries on, and yes, it's disruptive, and now everyone is looking forward to see how U.S. is coming back and what commitment will be on the table and how it's going to behave to be a constructive player in the international process.
Well, one day, the President-elect Joe Biden has promised that the U.S. will be back and rejoin the Paris Agreement. And also, he named John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, as his special envoy, basically, to climate change. John Kerry, again, talked about the U.S. leadership in that respect. As Changhua mentioned, the U.S. has a lot of strength in a variety of areas. It certainly can play a leadership role over there. But then there's a credibility issue. We know, as you mentioned, there's the electoral circle over there. There's a new policy probably under Joe Biden, but who knows, like 4 years later, will Trump come back again, or another Republican candidate or president come back again, and then everything will be reversed?
Yeah, that's certainly a concern. So now we're looking at Biden with high hopes because he's putting America back into the picture again, and that has shown that there is a change in balance regarding climate change. So this is the positive side. And there are some other positive movement in past 12 months. We have seen more pledges and a bigger commitment from UK, from EU, South Korea, from Japan. But then, in contrast, we see no pledge from Russia. So it is harder to get countries back on the table, especially regarding this issue, when you're talking about the post-pandemic recovery. But I do think the past 12 months has created this new hope that maybe with Biden's leadership and perhaps also with the collaboration between China and the U.S. regarding climate change issues, there can finally be a breakthrough.
Well, Changhua, speak of leadership. European Union has been, I would say, standing out in their commitment to, carbon, like a cut, let's say. They revised their goal by having tough talk among the 27 members inside the EU. So they have a new goal of like 55% reduction until 2030. Are you confident that they will implement as it is, literally?
I think EU's leadership has been recognized, and the EU is the first continent actually coming forward committing to carbon neutral or net zero carbon by mid-century, and they put that forward actually last year during the COP25, which is the previous one. And it's pretty much putting together the action plans in a convincing way. If you look at the Green Deal, the EU Green Deal, it's not just simply about emission reductions. Very importantly, is unfolding a convincing case that this is about how we regrow, reset the development path, meaning it's about clean technology, new energy, clean energy. It's about the new infrastructure. It's about the job creations. It's about justice, equity issues there. So on the overarching level, I think the EU continues to demonstrate its leadership, its commitment, because as I said, it's not simply about the responsibility. It's about future growth competitiveness issue. But by saying that, it's not that as easy as it's not just a number. We know EU 27, among 27 member states, you have Poland, Hungary, those countries continue to rely heavily actually on coal, on fossil fuels there. So there's a premium actually from at the beginning needs to be addressed in order to make sure all the countries are really with the EU level, European Commission together to deliver this. I think there's still a long way to go, or more work needs to happen from EU leadership perspective.
Well, speak of this, commitment and the contribution to the fight against climate change. You have to probably include China. Chinese leader has promised, to achieve carbon neutral 2060 one done. At the same time, China has an ambitious initiative called the Belt and Road Initiative. How can China, in what way China can, greening itself, but also contribute to the reduction of carbon emission in the Belt and Road Initiative nations, let's say?
I think in the past decade, China has already made a lot of changes in the overseas projects. In the beginning, there were more investment in coal-fired plants, for example, but later on, there were more investment in hydropower, in cleaner energy. So there has already been changes. And in the future, I think this trend will continue. For China itself, actually, in the past, China's growth has been dependent on infrastructure and housing. And when you look at the biggest emission industries, then there's buildings, transport, chemical industry, cement. These are the biggest polluters of all sectors. So when we look at the economy in the coming 10 years, obviously we cannot rely on the infrastructure and housing market anymore. I think the society and the business community still fail to grasp how big a change will come by 2030. So China will change its way of development and certainly will change its way of overseas investment strategy.
Well, thank you over there. Changhua, we'll talk to you later on. And let's move on to the domestically here in China. The southwestern city of Chengdu has become China's latest COVID hotspot after 10 new cases were confirmed this week. The city is now in the wartime mode with over 1.36 million people already tested in recent days. To find out more, we are joined by Zhou Ning, a medical doctor of the cardiology section at the Tongji Hospital in Wuhan. Well, we'll start with Wang Dan again here. The Chengdu resists, with the city to try to find out, what happened over there, where is the source of this latest infection. Some Chinese medical experts have said that, local infection inside China basically has died out. It's probably, again, coming from the source of, say, frozen food in the case over there. So what's the, how much do we know right now about the cluster of infection in Chengdu?
Well, I'm no medical expert, so from my observations, it does look like this is more likely from outside sources. It could be from frozen food, from some sort of delivery packages. Because the local has a large enough population that are healthy without the coronavirus. So the interactions have been healthy, and we haven't seen any other cases in other districts in Chengdu. So this is the positive sign. And also the traceability has become more transparent. So I think we do have reasons to believe this is from outside rather than local.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have Zhou Ning, medical doctor from of cardiology from Wuhan. So, Mr. Zhou here, what's your understanding? How far, if you look at the cases in Chengdu, how much do we know now? Where is the source? Is it a local infection, or is it from, again, imported frozen food?
Yes, thank you for your questions. So I got this question. I think these cases found in Chengdu, the patient lump zero, I think from the current small-scale outbreaks in China, we found that the majority of the source of the virus are traced back to the imported frozen food. So in fact, the local case is very rare in China, as you know, right? So the vast majority of the highly suspected cases and the confirmed cases are transmitted from the patient who have very direct or very close contact with the frozen food, as we found in Chengdu, this case. So as you know, in the past half a year, there have been very small outbreaks in some cities of China, which are mostly related to the cases imported from abroad, rather than the local cases in China. So, which also shows that the focus of the epidemic prevention and control in China now, and for a long time to come, is still to prevent the foreign source of the infection from being imported into China.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, Zhou Ning, a follow-up question here. Of course, if you look at the situation in China, I mean, the easy conclusion is, okay, all the new infections are mostly from the frozen foods imported from other countries. But then again, if you talk to health experts from outside China, including WHO, they would say, hey, there's a low risk of catching this virus from the frozen food. How do you somehow, like two different views, what's the interpretation over there?
So I think this is a relatively fair assessment. As you know, we don't have a lot of very local cases so far. So, I mean, the cases in China, we confirmed or we highly suspected are all those who have very close contact with the number zero patient who has contact with frozen food imported from abroad. So, I think the focus we should put to prevent the epidemic of COVID-19 in China is still to prevent the imported sources of the cases. Yes, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one Dan, related to this latest outbreak in Chengdu, of course, here is a 20-something year old young lady, and her basically personal information details were released on the internet, obviously against the law by somebody, which is who has been punished anyway. But there's a lot of shaming and I would say internet cyberbullying and name and calling over there. What do you make of that?
I think people have a right to both security and privacy. But when those two rights are in conflict, then there's a problem. And in the case of COVID, people might have good intentions. They want to find what the ultimate source is to prevent further spread, but then this can come out of control. So this case sort of reminded me of the fight years ago between Apple and FBI, because FBI would like Apple to unlock an iPhone to identify other terrorists. But then Apple basically refused it, saying this is a fundamental violation of its users' rights of privacy. And in this case of fighting this pandemic, I do think there is, since the spread is not nearly as severe as in the beginning, so there is no such urgency of using people's data at this kind of scale. And I do think regulations have stepped up, and it's very urgent.
But of course, if you look at this official release of information, I think most of people would say that's acceptable. Basically, it's about the first name, okay, 20 years, the lady by the name of Zhao probably, where she has been. That's whereabouts about the lady. That's all right. That's not personal information like your personal phone number, your email address, or where you live. It's a different set of information. So it's really about striking a balance. On one hand, if you have some degree of transparency, it's easy to fight against this COVID-19. On the other side, if you release too much information about the individual, that's obviously a violation about their privacy over there. How do you strike a balance between the two?
Well, there's always the risk of escalation. So if you release a little bit of information, then there are other ways to dig out more of this person. Since now social media is so widespread, you can always, by following those tracks, say this woman's name and where she's been about, then you can find out where she works or what she's been doing. There might be stalkers, there might be other crimes, so we have to prevent that. To strike a balance, I think eventually probably the data protection, privacy protection has to overweigh the public interest if it's not a public health emergency, because we do see more crimes in the past related to information release illegally. And it can cause financial fraud, and that can cause very severe consequences.
Well, the good thing is, like, we do see this strong action, basically, by the Sichuan government, provincial government, and also the top leader in Sichuan has made it publicly that, privacy protection of individuals must be protected by the government and should not be violated and abused even by some, I would say, unlawful individuals, through their online activities over there. But then if you're an economist, if you from economic point of view, if you look at compared situation in China and also the rest of the world, of course, like in the UK, Canada, US, they are looking, or they have already started the vaccination process of their own people. In China, the situation is very, I would say, very moderate. There's no hurry, no urgency to have a massive vaccination over there. But economically speaking, and should China start vaccination now, or can we afford to wait for a while?
I think from economic perspective, it is better to wait, because right now China has the situation under control, and the production of the vaccination actually takes time. If we want to ensure quality and a fair distribution among populations, then we do need more time to figure out a mechanism how to do that. Because in the beginning, there's no way to have everyone who need it to have it. So eventually, we have to make a priority list, and we need to figure out whether there's side effect, and we also need to figure out whether foreign countries, the Belt and Road countries, they would need more foreign aid from us. So in that situation, we also need to strike a balance between domestic demand and foreign demand. I think this is a political process, and it cannot really be rushed.
Well, thank you, Dr. Zhou and Wang Dan here. Let's leave it there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. Welcome back here. So Catherine Tai now is the new nominee by the presidential-elect Biden administration to be the trade representative. Wang Dan, how much do we know about Catherine Tai?
Actually, very little before she was appointed by Joe Biden. So we now know that her parents were Japanese, and they're originally from China, mainland China, and then later moved to Taiwan, and then later got their degrees from U.S. universities. So Tai is a pretty typical second generation of immigrant, and she also has a very elite background in education. Got her bachelor's degree from Yale and then a JD from Harvard Law School. So I would say she's very similar to the Obama administration's style of selection of people. So they have very glorious background education and also very diverse.
Mm-hmm. Well, Changhua, welcome back here. About the promotion or the selection of Catherine Dai, I think the Wall Street Journal had a story saying that her promotion from a staffer to the trade representative over there is unusual. So what's unusual about this process here?
A couple of things. I think her track record shows that. And if you look at her track record, her position has been very, very clear. She feels U.S. needs to be very tough on China from trade perspective, and her professional background basically, through the U.S. Trade Representative Office and also through her role as a senior trade counsel, a lawyer actually for the House Ways and Means Committee, she has demonstrated her track record. On the other side, I think now we're looking into the future, she will definitely bring that sort of toughness on China into her new role if she gets confirmed, in January. And basically, I think she also shows that she advocates, she prefers multilateral collaboration and prefers ally-based sort of approach. So China probably has to be mentally prepared. Even though she speaks Mandarin, she's fluent in Mandarin, and she speaks the language, there isn't much culture shock, but she's going to be really, really tough to work closely back to WTO with allies of the U.S. and figure out how to really address the single biggest pressing issues around competition from China.
Mm-hmm. Well, her fluency in Mandarin, is that, I would say that's a plus, right, for the interest of the U.S. in their negotiation with the Chinese side, Changhua. But at the same time, I mean, from the Chinese perspective, it's not a bad thing. Probably she will understand better about the Chinese situation.
Yes, I mean, like it's a plus and a minus. A plus meaning, yes, from communication perspective, from culture perspective, and from her professional experience, she's been really tough on China. She's been winning, the disputes, the trade dispute through WTO over the years. So yes, it's a plus. She knows China. She speaks the language. But on the other side, I think her approach, her position, definitely is very, very clear as well. Meaning she is going to be this cabinet level holding that position, and she will work with other allies and trying to figure out to really single out China as the single target actually to address the competition from China through the trade angle. So it could be a really tremendous challenge. I think that's a minus as well.
Well, Wang Dan, Catherine Dai is being described as being tough. In terms of U.S. trade policy toward China. Should China prepare for her incoming position or prepare for the trade talks, or will she, in what way should we be different from the current policy from the Trump administration, say?
I don't think there will be very distinct change, except the fact that she does speak Chinese, and that means she might get unnecessarily tough when it comes to certain compromises. Because now, with the political stalemate still going on in the U.S., any compromise that Joe Biden's administration throws to China, even if it's irrational, will be attacked from both the right and the left. And if Tsai take this new position and get into the new round of trade deal negotiation, I think she will behave very much like how she did when she helped Trump to revise the USMCA, that is the regional trade agreement with Mexico and Canada. She's very tough. She put America first. So I think China would expect actually maybe an even tougher stance from the U.S. when she takes over.
So it's about national interests. It's about whether you say it or not, is America first, or any country will fight for their own interests. Well, with that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests, in particular Changhua and Wang Dan. You can also watch our show on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo, and you can find me on Twitter as Xu Qinduo. Thank you for watching. See you next week.